Let's set up to make a print. The first thing you're going to need is a sheet. It can be just an old print of RC paper if you're making an RC print, or fiber paper if you're making a fiber print, which will serve as a focusing sheet. In other words, it's going to sort of hold the place of your actual photo paper and allow you to focus on that. So with the easel, you're going to slide it in and all the way over to the left in that middle slot, lower it down, and adjust the easel blades so that on the right and left, certainly, you're covering part of the edge of the paper. You're going to need a border on your prints for the manner of mounting that we're going to do in this class. And then I know that what I have in there is a panoramic negative, and so I've kind of preset my borders to what I think are pretty close. I've got it like 4 inches and 4 inches, and then 9 and 9 here. But obviously that'll just vary. You want your aperture on your lens to be at the widest, brightest setting. And so then you're going to turn this on to focus. I'm going to shut off this other light over here and see if you're able to see a little better what it is I'm doing. Yeah, I think you can see that pretty well. So you're going to need to zoom up a little bit if it's too small, zoom down if it's too big, and then you're going to need to alternate that possibly with using the focus knobs to fine-tune. You know, the focusing does have an effect on the size of the image, but in the end, you want to make sure that your image is fully, I guess you could say the edges are interrupted by the blades of the easel, because that's what's going to give you that nice, crisp, white edge. And that, in turn, when you go to matte, is going to look super cool. If you just allow the image to sort of end on its own and the easel blades aren't actually blocking the light from a little tiny bit of extra image, then you're going to get sort of hazy, irregular edges that are not going to look very good in a matte. So please familiarize yourself with how the easel is really meant to be used. So once you get it where, you know, it looks sharp to your eye, you're going to want to use what is called the grain magnifier, or grain focuser by some. And pardon me while I'm not quite ready in my home darkroom. I have a slightly different one, but they work the same way. You'll see in the place in our lab. Let me turn on the light again so you can see this little guy in action a little more. What it is it sits down always in the middle of the image, and then you look into it and you're going to see the grain, the actual grain of the image magnified for your eyes. And so what I think helps is to certainly get the focus close to sharp, just looking at it, but then place that grain magnifier in there, look into that, and just rock that focus up and back a little teeny tiny bit to see the actual grains of silver come into focus and out of focus, and then, you know, hopefully stop when they're actually in focus. And then you'll be ready to print. Always, 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 always start out with a filter in place. You can make a print with no filter, but God forbid you want to change the contrast in it, you'll have to start all over with your test strips. So always start with a filter. Try to remember that. Guess how many times I've had students come up to me and say they forgot the filter. Alright, take the middle one out of the stack. If you have average, you know, you developed your film right and you had pretty decent lighting on that day, chances are good that something like the 2 or the 2.5 are going to work just fine. These filters are, this is a pretty expensive set, sort of $60, and so I would really prefer that you handle them carefully. You hold on to them by the corners. You want to place this into the little filter drawer so that the rounded edge is tight up against the rounded edge of the filter drawer. And then remembering that if someone else is working in the lab, you want to make sure the light is off on your enlarger. Open up that top drawer and just slide that little filter drawer right into place. With these sets of filters, please just keep it next to your enlarger while you're working, and so that way if you change filters, you can put them into the nice, clean, dry, not going to fall on the floor and get scratched filter box as you work with them. So scratches aren't good, wet hands aren't good. There's a little sign on the inside of each package kind of reminding you, but I mean essentially just keep your fingers out of the middle of the filter and you're good to go. So you're always going to start with a filter in place. We've already focused the enlarger, and so now I've stopped the enlarger lens down to f11 because a higher aperture is going to create better focus in the finished print. And then, like for now, I've just set my timer for 5 seconds. That's going to vary a little bit. If you have a fairly dark, densely exposed negative, you may need to set the timer a little longer. If it's a fairly pale negative, a little bit thin as we call it, underexposed, then you may need a little shorter setting, but 5 seconds is a good place to start. And so then we need to take our focusing sheet out of there because we're soon going to be putting in an actual sheet and making a test strip. Here's my first test strip. As a general rule, you always establish density first and then perfect contrast later. So what does that mean? Density means literally the density of silver that you are causing to accumulate or be developed on the paper. So in other words, we establish how light or dark the test strip is first. We pick the right exposure amount first, and then we start to worry about whether we need to change the filter or not in order to control the differences between the lights and darks overall in the image. So I have arranged it, it's a long, narrow negative, and I had kind of a big test strip here. So I arranged it sort of diagonally across to the best that I could, and that's really important. You want to have, ideally, in for instance a landscape picture, you would like to have time exposures to compare where you have sky and middle ground and foreground all in one strip. So this isn't totally the best example. It would have been better. In fact, you could imagine it just that I made a strip going this way, I suppose, so that each swath would have gone that direction. Because really we want to be comparing the background, the foreground, and the middle ground in each step of time that we tested. But anyway, this gets us kind of close. So this is 1 click, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It always goes from lightest to darkest. If you think it through, that makes kind of obvious sense. Less exposure is going to be lighter. But this was the first strip that I exposed. It's just then it built up. It doubled and it doubled and it doubled. Err on the side of picking a strip that's a tiny bit lighter than what you think. There is a general sort of phenomenon with darkroom photography that beginners often make prints that are a little too dark, and they're often also a little bit too flat. So beginners, generally speaking, tend to pick too dark of an increment as far as the time, and then they set their filters too low. So, if you start out by saying, well, I think it's this one, maybe choose the next one lighter from that, and then make a whole size print, look at how it it feels as a whole, and maybe see if actually adjusting the filter higher gives you a little more of that richness that you enjoyed in the darker strip, but then you also get the highlights as well. So for my first full-size print, I'm not going to go with the 5-second exposure. This just looks too wishy-washy down here. But I am going to go with the one that was 2 clicks, this one right in the middle. And I suspect I'm going to need to raise my filter, but you know what? I'm going to wait until I have a full-size print to evaluate that. If you want to save money by being more economical with paper, stick a big test strip down on there. You know, you could cut your paper into quarters. Take a quarter of a sheet of paper, put it down there, and make that whole exposure for 2 clicks of the timer and see how that looks. You might very well be able to decide on what to do about your filters at that stage. And you just spent a quarter of the money that you would have had you put a full-size sheet down. So we've looked at the print, and we've seen that this area, which in the negative of course looks really light, was too dark in the print. Too much light was getting to it. And then over on this side as well. Also in the middle of the print, mainly in the sky, and then also down here in the foreground, it was actually a tiny bit too light. And so to correct for those things, what we want to do is called burning and dodging. Dodging has to take place during the initial set of exposures that you're doing. So in the case of this print, it ended up being 2 clicks of the timer for 5 seconds. So at some point during those 2 clicks of 5 seconds, I'm going to use my dodging tool. I'll maybe get another shot of this with the light on because it's hard to tell, but basically it's a wire. Oh, I know what I'll do. Watch that. So it's just a wire with a piece of mat board on the end. And so the mat board is going to be used to block a certain portion of the photo just by creating a shadow of it. And by moving it just a little tiny bit, you can see that what's going to happen is it's not going to create a harsh image of itself. It's just going to lightly withhold exposure from that one little area of the image. So I'm going to do that during the first of my 5-second clicks, and then during the second one I'm going to jump over and catch this side of things. And what's cool is that you really have a lot of flexibility, you know, with one little paddle shaped thing. You can cut these to any shape that you need, but you know, if you put it down low, it just casts a very small shadow of itself. If you bring it up, it casts a very big shadow of itself. If you turn it on an angle, you can dodge a long narrow area. Of course, if you round it out, then it's bigger. So you can be pretty inventive about that. The point to the wire is that as long as you move the dodging tool in a slight circle, the wire is not going to block enough light to leave, like, you know, a white line in your photo. If you move back and forth, it will, because look what's happening to that line. It's staying in the same place. So you have to remember to move in a slight circle, and that's how you can lighten up things in the middle of the image without, you know, creating a whole pathway to them. So that's dodging, and like I said, that has to happen as a subtractive effort during the first part of the exposure, the part that would make the rest of the print all look fine. Burning is going to involve adding exposure to part of your image, and so burning is going to be something that you're going to do to denser areas of the negative, such as the sky area up here or the foreground down here. Burning in, you know, if it happens with a sky, that's pretty easy to do with just a couple of pieces of mat board. You can kind of shape them to sort of mimic the sky area that you need to add exposure to. And what's kind of cool is you can see the image is being projected down onto the actual mat board right now, and so I can really see right where it's leaving off. So for this image, what I would do would be, I'd do my initial 2 clicks. So during the first click I'm dodging. Second click, I'm going to hurry up and dodge over here. Now that's the first, that's the 2 clicks that got the good base exposure for the majority of the piece. And now that I need to add a tiny bit more light, just to anchor that foreground area and to darken the sky up just a little bit so it's not total paper white. Now I need to add light, which is called burning, so I can click the timer on with everything blocked and then quickly move down in. And because the image is projected so nicely onto this white cardboard, it's really easy for me to see when I've got it pretty much in the right place to do my burning in. Now I can switch sides, bring it down here, catch a little bit of that foreground. I'm just going to move each of the pieces of mat board in a circle as I'm doing my burning in. You could also, say you had to burn something that was right in the middle. You could, you know, we've got plenty of mat board, Lord knows we do, in matting and mounting. You could just, you know, punch a hole in the middle of a sheet, and say I needed to burn something right in the middle, I could block it with my hand, turn on the light, get this right to the place that I needed to burn in, and then move my hand out of the way, and off I go. So that's burning and dodging. Dodging is essentially subtracting light from the initial overall exposure, and burning is adding light in addition to the overall exposure. Let's have a look at the prints. One thing I want to encourage you to do is to take notes while you're working. And so you can see here, this is just my method. It works pretty well for me. It just in a notebook, you know, here's a bunch of other prints I've done. Write the date, write kind of a description of what print you're working on, and then so I just have a 1, and then I have the data associated with that. I don't bother writing the f-stop because I always use the same f-stop on the enlarger. So what I have written down is 2 times 5 seconds, that's the exposure. Filter is a 2.5, and so the one with a circle on it corresponds, if you can see this in the video, I've drawn a little 1 in pencil on the back of my photo paper, and I did that before I even put the photo paper into the chemicals. So I just, as soon as I'd exposed it on my enlarger, I flipped it over, used the pencil, and wrote a 1 on the back. That is way easier than writing all this data on the back of the photo. You don't really have room to do that on the back of the photo without actually pushing through and damaging the image itself. But, you know, a little 1 written over your border, no big deal. So here's the first one. So this was, like I said, made with a filter 2.5, the sort of starter filter, if you will. And I kind of felt like it was a little too low in contrast. It just lacked a little, you know, definition. And when you're trying to determine contrast, it sometimes helps to look at the individual textures of things. And you can see the grass here really doesn't actually have a lot of texture. So after looking at that one, what I did was then for the second print, I decided to keep the same exposure because it didn't look too dark overall or too light overall, but I went up a full grade in filter, in other words, to a number 3.5. And so that's number 2. Here's the number 2 on the back of my print, so I know this is the one that was made that way. And I'll grab that 1 out again so you can see. So you can see there's really a very subtle difference between you know, a full number change in filters. The sky is in fact a little lighter in the second print, and the foreground is a little lighter. and the shadow areas are a little darker. I think where you probably see it the most is in this bush right here. The shadows really got a lot heavier and darker down at the bottom, and then the highlights are a little brighter, where this it's a little more unified gray all the way around. The tree in the background too. You can see in the first print it's sort of just a hazy gray. In the second print it has a little more oomph to the shadows at the bottom of things. So my big suggestion to you as far as changing filters is I wouldn't even really bother changing it, honestly, a half a grade filter. Change more than you think you need at first, because it's easier than just edging your way along, right? So if you make a print on a 2.5 and you look at it and you're like, I don't know, I feel like I could have a little more textural oomph and detail, I should go up in contrast. If you feel like that about it, go up at least a full grade. If you look at it and you go, oh, that is so flat, it looks like a boring newspaper print, it's like gray on gray, that looks like the poo, go up 2 numbers. Like if it was on a 2.5, go up to a 4.5. The worst that'll happen is you'll make that print of the 4.5, you'll look at it and go, whoa, okay, that was too much, and then you'll know how much to kind of back off, right? So if you've got too flat over here, too contrasty over here, you kind of know what level of filter in between will fix that. If you just edge along and go, well, a 2.5 was too low in contrast, so I'll go with the 3. That's still low in contrast. I'll go to the 3.5. That's still low in contrast. I'll go to the 4. You see where I'm going? Before you know it, your lab time is going to be gone. You're going to be out of a lot of paper because you will have just been edging along. And then on top of that, it gets really hard to tell. As you get closer and closer to the right print, it really gets harder to diagnose if there really is something wrong. Easier to make big steps and then split the difference. So, that said, I made my higher contrast print, and I decided I liked it pretty well. But what I didn't like was how dark it got in here and over here. And so like comparing those two dark edges with this really bright sky and relatively bright foreground, I was like, oh, that just feels like sort of imbalance in the eye flow, really, you know. So enter print number 3. 3, this is another reason to write stuff down. Man, when you're new in it at all this, are you going to really remember all that stuff? Look at that. So, 2 clicks of the 5 seconds, that stayed. Keeping the filter 3.5. But, during those 2 clicks, I decided I should dodge the dog that's on the right. Bet you didn't even know there was a dog, because it was so dark. So I decided I'm going to dodge over here, hold back some light, so that's not actually going to get 2 full clicks. It's going to get more like 1 click. And then I'm also going to dodge the hedge on the left, which I also felt was too dark. So I sort of wrote down that recipe, so then, you know, I can have it sitting next to me on the enlarger baseboard, and I can kind of remind myself, okay, what am I doing? So I dodged those, and then after I had taken care of that initial exposure, I was like, you know what, I need to burn in that sky a little bit. That sky is really too bright. So what I did was kind of a cool little trick. If you actually, you know, make your overall print on the contrast filter that you had in mind in the first place, 3.5 in this one, then if you go to burn in something like the sky where it doesn't really have as much texture, it just needs tonality, and you don't want to sort of slop over as you're adding exposure to the sky and wind up with super dark trees where you were trying to burn the sky, but you sort of jigged the top of the trees a little bit. You can switch down in filters. And the brilliance of that is that a low-numbered filter, it emphasizes its efforts on highlight areas, but it leaves shadow areas alone. So how cool is that? if I switch down to a lower numbered filter and go to burn in the sky, it's going to home in on darkening up these sky tones, but it's going to leave the darker tones along the horizon and the top of this tree alone. It's not going to, you know, mess up and turn them really black. So, I already did that. And this, is this the resulting print? Yeah, I think so. You know what? This is it. So if we look on the side, you can see that, oh my God, there is a dog there. It's quite a bit lighter than, where did print number 2 go? Print number 2, come back. There. So there we go. Too dark there and lighter here. A lot more detail in the foliage. Here it's just, what we call it is blocked up, when it's just really a solid mass and it looks like an abstract shape. So dodging definitely helped continue the eye flow this way. And then on the left hand side, move this arrangement, you can see there's a little more separation between the bushes and things in the new print than there is there. And finally the sky also improves just a little. So here in summary, we've got the first print at a slightly lower contrast. You can see a difference in the shadow areas, and especially in the black areas where it's kind of blocking up. So I dodged, revealing a dog on the left-hand side of the frame, as you can see in the before and after. And then on the left-hand side of the frame also, it's kind of separated those bushes out one from another to reveal a little more of their shape. So we started here, slightly lower contrast print and blockiness in the shadows, and then by the end we had a little more three-dimensionality caused by the higher filter, and dodging causing more detail in those shadow areas on the sides.